Resuming debate, the honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is an honor to be able to join in debate on this important issue, the Data Charter Implementation Act. And certainly I will be diving into what is an incredibly, well, it's large in terms of the size of the bill and addresses a large spectrum of some of the issues that we face in the world in which we live that have been exacerbated by COVID, as so much of what we do, whether it be in this place, and the evidence of that is the fact that I am participating in this debate from Battle River Crowfoot in Alberta. The fact that digital has really been transformed over the last number of months with COVID before us, and certainly I will be getting into different aspects of the bill, some of the things that I think are laudable, and then some of the concerns that I have. But Mr. Speaker, it's interesting, and I saw the previous member who did a great job on her speech from Calgary, but I would note that you saw in her background there was snow on the ground. And Mr. Speaker, that's certainly one of the interesting things about our country, where it's often joked that if you wait a few minutes, the weather will change. And that certainly has been the case in East Central Alberta. So I would like to take a moment of my time to talk about the wildfires that did start and were a part of what has really consumed a significant amount of time over the last number of days. It's been very dry in Battle River Crowfoot since the snow melted, and although there's been some moisture that has lessened the likelihood of those fires, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of those firefighters, volunteer and volunteer professionals. Mr. Speaker, it is often a misconception that volunteer firefighters are somehow inferior to their full-time counterparts in the city. Mr. Speaker, there was one example, and there's been a number of grass fires over the last week or so in Battle River Crowfoot, but one particularly large one had a tremendous response. I believe there was 4 or 5 fire departments from different small communities that reached out and worked together, along with hundreds of community volunteers that put out this particular fire. And I would note, Mr. Speaker, how important it is that we take fire safety seriously at a time when moisture is certainly needed. And although there was a little bit here over the weekend, I received more than just a few comments that there rarely are people thankful for snow in April. But for those who saw the threat of fire, they were thankful for the moisture that came over this past weekend. And I would, just as a reminder to all of those watching, to be careful when you are out in rural areas when there is such a threat of fire as there is today, and thank all of those who put their lives on the line to protect folks in this area and across Canada from the threat of fire. So, Mr. Speaker, on to the substance of what we're debating here today. It's interesting as we look at Bill C-11, and there's the 2 major parts of this bill. Part 1 that enacts Consumer Privacy Protection Act and various aspects that are involved with the protection of personal privacy, and certainly at a time when everything we do is online, it is a significant topic of conversation that needs to be discussed. And then part 2 enacts the Personal Information and Data Protection Tribunal Act, which establishes a tribunal to hear appeals related to personal information and privacy. See, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting as the world has become more digital, the fact that so much of our lives is detailed online, and further that so much of the information we see goes through a filter. I use often, as I hear from constituents who will talk to me about the things they see on Facebook or other social media platforms, even the advertisements that they see when they Google something, or the fact that we even refer to searching for a term on the internet as Googling. Speaks to how the extent to which our information is online. And certainly we see that that there is the need for stronger protections to ensure that Canadians' data and their information, that their rights, ultimately, that their rights are protected. And certainly we've had a lot of conversation around privacy as a human right. And what I would suggest further, the property rights are in terms of data that is online. And we see Bill C-11 as an attempt to address that. Now, when you look through, and I've listened with great interest to some of the Liberal speeches on this matter, and a lot of the points that they bring up are certainly laudable in their goals. However, I think that the proof will be in the implementation, and there's certainly a lack of clarity and a lack of concrete measures that are outlined here for the sake of ensuring that what is talked about in the preamble and in the words that are spoken by the minister and various Liberal members, to ensure that those goals, those ideas are actually translated into actionable items that do what's best for the interests of Canadians, and with particular concern on an issue like this. Mr. Speaker, we have seen unprecedented scandal, mismanagement, and a level of access to the highest offices of this land by those who can afford to pay, those who happen to have the Prime Minister and his staff on speed dial. And in a bill like this, where billions of dollars are at stake, corporate interests, it should force every Canadian to pause and say, okay, when they say that this will be implemented and it will be informed by regulation, the process between a bill's implementation and ensuring that it's effectively implemented through regulation, what sort of lobbying will take place and who will benefit? Mr. Speaker, I think that these are valid questions that need to be asked. And certainly we have seen that there is very little trust that the Liberals have with Canadians when it comes to ensuring that it's actually Canadians' best interests are served when they're getting phone calls from their well-connected friends and businesses that they associate with. So certainly, as this bill, I'm sure, will likely go to committee, these are the sorts of questions that have to be asked to ensure that when it comes to the data and privacy of Canadians, when it comes to online, when it comes to some of the transparency mechanisms, that every aspect of that is clearly parsed out so that Canadians can trust that it's not simply that the regulations aren't simply being sold to the highest bidder or those who have the most expensive lobbyists and lawyers that happen to be able to get FaceTime with those in the Prime Minister's office. And now some will suggest that this is cynical or simply not true. Well, Mr. Speaker, we could go through a long list of those failures as it's been outlined over the last 5 years of Liberal scandal and mismanagement. And Mr. Speaker, none is more obvious on that front than the reality. And I say reality because using definitive language like that is often what can get politicians into trouble. But it is the reality, Mr. Speaker, that there is a clear call to ban Huawei from Canada's 5G network. Yet the Liberals, the government, has refused to act on that simple demand, and it leaves one to draw conclusions about who is able to influence their decision-making processes. And certainly, Conservatives have and will continue to stand up for the rights of Canadians. That includes the right for Canadians to have privacy online. And although, as I see, Mr. Speaker, my time is nearing an end, there are some laudable goals in this, and certainly I would suggest that all parliamentarians here believe that we need to address the issues that are brought up in this legislation. We have to ensure that we do it. And I will simply say as well that the Liberals will, without a doubt, and as I believe they already have today, will blame the opposition for delay tactics, to block committees and various other things. Well, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that we have seen time and time again that the Liberals will bring something forward like a bill and will demand it be passed. And even though the very reason for some of those delays are entirely of their own making, and yet when they later learn that they made mistakes that could have been identified through things like full democratic discourse and comprehensive committee research, and specifically to note the fact that earlier today the Liberals blocked a motion that would have sent this to the industry committee. Mr. Speaker, there is reason why this deserves full consideration, and certainly Conservatives are doing our part to ensure that we have a fulsome debate, to ensure that Canadians get the answers that they need on this important subject. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to questions.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There are thousands or even millions of applications, and some of those applications use games, for example, or questionnaires to get people's attention, and then to get people's information from their contact lists, for example. And when the user confirms that, you know, when they agree to all of the terms and conditions, well, then their contact lists are sent to an organization or a business of some sort. So I'd like to hear what my colleague has to say about some of those shortcomings in the bill in limiting those applications. The Honourable Member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question, as I think it emphasizes how complex the series of issues surrounding digital privacy are. Whether it be an application that a child installs on a phone, and when you click that button, and rarely do people read the sometimes thousands of pages of terms and conditions that you agree to. Sometimes it is certainly enlightening to even just take a moment and see what one is agreeing to. And although there have been steps taken by the private sector to address some of those things, for example, app stores having verified apps versus unverified apps and whatnot, this touches on the whole host of challenges associated with ensuring that there is digital privacy, and that Canadians ultimately have a right to ensure that their data is protected. And then further to that, Mr. Speaker, and I'll wrap up to this, that so often digital information does not necessarily have clear borders. So this is not only something that is a Canadian issue, it's a world issue, especially as servers exist often in different jurisdictions, and the many challenges that exist around that. And that's why this debate today, Mr. Speaker, is so important.
Questions and comments? Honourable Member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member won't be surprised to hear that I'm disappointed in some of the remarks that he made during his intervention, but towards the end there, he expressed displeasure with the fact that the House didn't pass a unanimous consent motion that was brought forward, and that we stopped it. Well, we also put one forward that was identical, that this bill can go to the committee which it's been assigned towards. And I mean, I know that there are some discrepancies and different opinions as to where the bill should go, but you know, even the member from Saanich Gulf Islands said that this bill has toes or feet in both committees. But more importantly, when he talked about what's been going on in this House, I mean, geez, there's so many pieces of legislation that I'd like to see us discuss here, like conversion therapy. You know, it took us, because of conservative stall tactics, about 7 months to pass the fall economic statement. Does the member really believe that it's the Liberals that have been slowing down the legislative process in the House?
Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
There it is again, Mr. Speaker. You know, I find it unsurprising but incredibly troubling, the sort of rhetoric that comes from that side of the House, and especially when the simple answer to this question is 35 days delay. That is the legacy of a prime minister that is covering up his We Charity scandal. 35 days delay because of prorogation. The government is in charge of the legislative agenda of this House, and it is incumbent upon every member of Parliament to stand up for their constituents and ensure that their voices are heard. And Mr. Speaker, to hear the honourable member across the way speak so flippantly about somehow this being a Conservative problem, well, Mr. Speaker, he couldn't be more wrong. He and all members of the government should look in the mirror and acknowledge that this is a Liberal problem. And further, there have been bills related to COVID relief programs that have had to come back to this House 3 separate times. When it comes to the debate, had there been fulsome Democratic discourse in the beginning, Mr. Speaker, it wouldn't have had to come back 3 times to fix Liberal mistakes. So, Mr. Speaker, I will take no lessons from the members opposite about somehow them blaming Conservatives for delay, when the reality is they're in government and it's their mistakes that are causing these problems, and 35 days delay because of the Prime Minister covering up his prorogation and We Charity scandals.